Good morning. Today is Wednesday, the 19th of March. This is the Family Care and Aging Policy Committee. Come to order. I think we'll get started even though we don't have a quorum. We'd like to get the presentation started. So, Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and member. Before you is Senate File 931. It is for an appropriation for the Office of Ombudsman for Long-Term Care. We've talked at length for the last couple of years the importance of the Ombudsman's office and being the mediator for a lot of our families. And we have an appropriation for fiscal year 2020. And here to talk about the bill is Aisha Elmquist, a policy specialist for the Office of the Ombudsman for Long-Term Care.
Good morning and welcome to the committee. Would you please introduce yourself?
Good morning and thank you. My name is Aisha Elmquist and I am the policy specialist with the Office of Ombudsman for Long-Term Care. Mr. Chair and members, thank you very much for inviting us to present today. And Senator Housley, thank you very much for authoring this bill and for being a champion for our office. We greatly appreciate it. I am very pleased to be here on behalf of Cheryl Hennon, the State Ombudsman for Long-Term Care. As you know, complaints of elder abuse are significantly on the rise, and how we address those complaints is critically important. But we also have to ask, and we know that you have asked, what can we do to help prevent this problem? What can we do to help improve the quality of care and to protect resident rights? And the work of our office, the Office of Ombudsman for Long-Term Care, is critical to this effort to prevent abuse and to better protect rights. We are a program of the Minnesota Board on Aging, and the heart of what we do is direct advocacy on the ground that is done by staff members called the Regional Ombudsman. The regional ombudsmen are passionate, dedicated advocates who work every day in nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and other locations where long-term care services are offered and received. We are also very lucky to have Cheryl Hennon as our state ombudsman, and she has spoken to you previously about some of the systemic issues that we are seeing in long-term care. The Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program was initiated by the federal government to improve the quality of care of Americans receiving long-term care services. And the Older Americans Act required all state agencies on aging to establish an ombudsman program. As I mentioned, the heart of our work is casework and representing clients. And if I could pull up a graph for you here. This graph shows the sharp increase in complaints that we have received in our office. And what this demonstrates is the complaints that we receive as part of our casework. Through our casework, we respond to complaints, which are shown here, investigate, and then follow up through mediation and empowerment and other tools. And I'll give you some examples of that work shortly. But what you can see here is over the past several years, the sharp increase in complaints we have received. And in fact, in our last reporting year, complaints rose in every single category that we track. And we track many different categories. And that would include some significant spikes, such as a 33% rise in 1 year of complaints about staffing, a 47% rise in complaints about environment and safety. And over the past 4 years, we've had an 150% increase in complaints of abuse, neglect, or financial exploitation. All of the complaints that you see listed here involve serious complaints about quality of life and care issues. And as we do this work, we see many vulnerable residents who have little to no family or friend support who we're able to help. We also see residents who have very involved families, who may have jobs, their own health issues, children who they are raising, and they are trying to navigate a complex system for someone who they dearly love. And we are able to step in those situations and provide needed assistance. So I'll give you a few specific examples of our casework to help demonstrate what we do. One of the top complaints that we receive year over year is about involuntary discharges. And as you know, discharges can be very traumatic for residents and for families and can lead to some very serious effects through transfer trauma. As one example of a case that we handled, there was a resident with dementia who was threatened with discharge for his verbal treatment of other residents. And we were able to do investigation, to talk to the family, to talk to the provider, to talk to the primary care physician, and help to figure out what are some better ways to handle this resident's needs throughout the day. A better supervision plan, greater engagement with more activities and other approaches. And through this improved care plan, the issues were addressed and termination was no longer pursued. Another example, you will see here a picture, and we do have permission to use this picture. This is the client involved in the second example, who is a veteran. And he gave to our regional ombudsman the note that you see written here, which says, "I tried to serve my community, my country, my schools, my family, my church, my God. Now I need help. Who will help me? I am 97 years old." This is a common sentiment among the people who we have the honor to serve. In this particular case, this gentleman received a bill from a facility that was nearly double the amount that he had been expecting. And the note he wrote to express his sense of vulnerability and frustration. He felt that his rights were not being respected, his right to make decisions about his own life, that he was not being properly respected by staff. The regional ombudsman confirmed that the fees and charges he had received were not, in fact, properly disclosed and was able to receive a refund of approximately half of the disputed amount. And importantly, and this happens often in our casework, we had a specific complaint, but we were able to then address an issue that affected more than one person. And in this case, the facility agreed to change their contract to make clearer for all residents the fees that were associated with the services at the facility. Another example, final example before I move on, was a 78-year-old woman with Alzheimer's, a very tragic case, who was sexually assaulted at an assisted living facility by an employee. Our staff member had previous contact with this resident and made frequent visits to her. She was able to provide reassurance to the victim at the time of DNA being gathered from her by law enforcement, and also provided assistance with the court case. She also helped to set up additional psychological services for the victim. And in this case, there was a belief by some that that would not benefit this particular victim because of her Alzheimer's disease. And that's another thing that our office can bring to the table, is because regional ombudsmen are in the field every day working with people with dementia, working with other people with disabilities, is that knowledge that in fact she could benefit from those services, and really having that knowledge and expertise related to services and disabilities. We also do a significant amount of work outside of casework, and this gives you just a little preview of that work. In the last reporting year, we had approximately 4,500 activities outside of our casework, which include things like trainings to facility staff, community education, and many of these activities are also consultations with providers, and we do have a lot of support among the provider community. When we have a regular presence at facilities, we can create relationships with residents and also with administrators and other staff. And what we'll find is we may go into a facility and perhaps an administrator may approach a regional ombudsman and say, "Hey, could you come into my office? I'm thinking about implementing this policy. What do you think about that?" and gives us the opportunity to weigh in on resident rights issues before a policy has even been implemented. And that's another way that we can help to protect resident rights and be involved in prevention. We also have volunteers. And our volunteer program is conducted under the supervision of regional ombudsmen. And if we receive an increase in staff, one of the things that we very much hope to do and expect to do is to expand our volunteer program, because we do need additional ombudsmen in order to supervise that work. And to give you one example, which is shown in this picture here, of the positive work that volunteers can do. In the background of this picture is a volunteer. And the rest of the people who you see pictured are resident council members at a nursing home. And she was able to work with the resident council to implement a concern form. After this concern form was implemented, a variety of concerns were written down by the residents. The regional ombudsman followed up 2 weeks later, and every single concern had been addressed. And this is a fantastic example of resident council and resident empowerment, and also the important work of our volunteers. And finally, another important aspect of our work is systemic advocacy. And we look at our data, we track data, and we also have the experiences of the regional ombudsman who can tell us, we are seeing a problem at this particular facility that keeps coming up again and again. Or perhaps there's a company who owns multiple facilities, and we're seeing the problem across those facilities. And instead of just continuing to address things one by one, we will sometimes ask to sit down with corporate management and say, these are some concerns we're seeing. How can we address this on a more systemic level? And we have seen improvements result from that. And also part of our systemic advocacy is coming to people like you and telling you the issues that we're seeing across our casework. Unfortunately, as we know you're all aware, we have a severe staffing crisis in Minnesota for the Ombudsman's office. And this map shows you the regions that we currently have, and each region is assigned to one regional ombudsman. You can see that we have extremely large geographic regions, and in the metro, the density of facilities and population in our regions is highly significant. Some staff in Greater Minnesota spend over 80 hours a month traveling, and that significantly impacts their ability to be there for residents. And I would add that a lot of our work simply cannot be conducted over the phone because of the disabilities of the people we serve, the need to collaborate with providers and to have a presence and to build trust. We truly need to be present in order to address many of the complaints that we receive. Minnesota is ranked at the bottom nationally in terms of our bed to regional ombudsman ratio, and we are far behind the national or regional average in staffing. If I were to show you this map with dots on it for the assisted living facilities and nursing homes, much of the map, the majority of the map, would be practically black with dots. And that does not even include the full extent of our authority, because we have a lot of work that is also outside of those particular facilities and other long-term care settings. So that is why we are here today to testify in support of SF 931, which is seeking 25 additional regional ombudsmen and 6 additional staff to support. And thank you again, Senator Housley, for authoring and for your support of this bill. This will still not get us to the national average, but it is a significant step in the right direction by getting us to the regional average so we can at least keep up with our neighbors. With our rapidly aging population and an ever-increasing need for our services, we need this funding now. We desperately need this funding. This final slide shows you some direct quotes from people who have been impacted by our work. And these come from the client satisfaction surveys that we do send out after we've closed a case. Just to read you the first one, it says, "The ombudsman came to my rescue when the facility was threatening to kick my husband out because they couldn't care for him. She talked to me and then to them, and the threat disappeared." The individuals who we represent could be our friends, our neighbors, our family, and perhaps someday ourselves. We see hardworking people, veterans, teachers, nurses who have contributed an incredible amount to their communities and may now be at the most vulnerable point in their lives. The types of problems that we see can be heartbreaking, and we do not want to turn anyone away, and we know that you don't want that to happen either. And we are here because we need your assistance to provide that help. With your help, we can prevent problems before they occur, empower residents, educate and consult with providers, identify and address systemic issues, collaborate with critical stakeholders, and we truly do value that collaboration, and maintain a presence at facilities that allows us to achieve all those goals, and also to be present for residents who may not have any way to contact us other than if we are there and able to talk to them directly. Thank you so much for your time and support.
Thank you. I believe you have some other testifiers, Senator Housley?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I've got Mr. Burke, the Public Policy Director for the Minnesota Elder Justice Center.
All right. And, for the record, we do have a quorum. Mr. Burke, welcome to the committee. Will you introduce yourself?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Sean Burke. I'm the Public Policy Director at the Minnesota Elder Justice Center. Many thanks to Senator Housley for bringing forward this timely and much-needed bill for funding for the Ombudsman's Office. Our organization is a statewide nonprofit. We work with older adults, vulnerable adults, and their family members from all over the state. We work with those who are in the community, experiencing abuse in their own homes, and those in long-term care settings, experiencing issues with their services, abuse and neglect and exploitation. And we have the occasion, the frequent occasion, to work closely with the Ombudsman's Office, who are the boots on the ground advocates in our long-term care facilities. Unlike the advocates in our office, the regional ombudsmen have a unique and special role. They have the mandate and the ability to work on the ground, helping residents resolve disputes and problems in their facilities. Many times, we work as a team. Cases can be complex. Mix in family dynamics, the complexities of payments and regulation in these settings, and changing care needs of vulnerable individuals. It creates a lot of confusion about what a family's rights are and what a resident's rights are. The regional ombudsmen, those advocates that you just heard about, they are crucial to provide much needed and timely resources. And we cannot be as effective in our work without them as a resource. This bill will allow much needed increase in funding as we have lagged behind for far too long. Furthermore, it's very timely that you are hearing this bill on the same day as Senate File 8, as good advocacy is only as helpful as the tool that advocates have at their disposal. As you heard in Ms. Elmquist's presentation, many cases that the ombudsman work on include harmful discharges and terminations from facilities. So, as you consider assisted living licensure provisions in SF8 and moving forward, we urge you to ensure that residents have the strongest possible protections from unnecessary discharge in assisted living. That will ensure that our ombudsman and our regional ombudsman on the ground have tools at their disposal to be the strongest advocates possible. Again, many thanks to Senator Housley. We look forward to the day, hopefully very soon, that we are no longer last or near last in the funding of this critical state resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. I believe you have Ms. Thurlow and Aaron Bew.
Mr. Chair, yes, I have Carrie Thurlow from Leading Age and Aaron Bowie from Care Providers.
welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Erin Bowie. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Care Providers of Minnesota, here today as part of the Long-Term Care Imperative. First, I want to thank Senator Housley for bringing this bill forward, and I also want to thank the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman for the good work that they do. As you may have heard in committees past, another 60,000 Minnesotans will be turning 65 this year, next year, and every year through the 2020s. Soon, for the first time, we will have more seniors than school-age children for the first time in Minnesota history. As our population ages, the care needs for Minnesota's seniors will increase, and they will be turning in increasing numbers to our senior care communities. As you heard, Minnesota's funding for the staffing of the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman has lagged behind in the rest of the country. The Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman plays a valuable role in working with consumers and providers to reach productive resolutions to concerns and complaints. The role for this office is only going to increase in the coming years, and we support efforts to increase the staffing numbers in this office. It is important for consumers to have an independent advocate in our settings, and it is also frequently of assistance to providers when the Long-Term Care Ombudsman becomes involved in helping to mediate disputes. Again, thanks to Senator Housley for bringing this bill forward, and I'll now turn it over to my colleague to say additional positive things about the bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Carrie Thurlow with Leading Age Minnesota, here on behalf of the Long-Term Care Imperative. I also want to thank Senator Housley for bringing this legislation forward. The Ombudsman's Office plays several important roles, as you've already heard today, and they are excellent partners with the long-term care provider community. They help in facilitating and mediating conflicts, improving communications. They also help us and partner with us oftentimes in training the many good caregivers that are out throughout Minnesota. And we want to thank that office and Cheryl Hennon for her leadership and partnership with the provider community. As many of you know, there were several interim work groups established that met throughout the fall and the winter last year to try to address the myriad of issues that were raised last session with regard to improving our vulnerable adult protection in senior care settings. One of those work groups, I attended most of those meetings. One of those work groups was around the area of consumer rights. And while there were a wide variety of stakeholders that participated with a lot of perspectives, one of the very key things that we agreed upon is that the Ombudsman's Office needs additional resources, that it is a crucial element in the big overall picture of, I think, where we all have consensus in what we are trying to solve this year. So we are very pleased to support this legislation. And again, thanks Senator Housley for bringing this forward.
Thank you. Okay. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Beth McMullen. I'm Vice President of Government Affairs for the Alzheimer's Association. I intended to sign up, and I think, Larissa, you were figuring this out. I intended to sign up to testify on the next bill. However, my lobbying mentor, the late, great Senator Dwayne Benson, always told me if someone hands you a mic, take it. So I did intend to have a letter of support prepared for this bill. So the Alzheimer's Association is proud to support this bill funding additional FTEs for the Long-Term Care Ombudsman's Office. We work on a regular basis with that office. We refer people that call our helpline to them for assistance in the work that they do. This is an absolute need, and we're happy to support it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Elwood.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, Ron Elwood with Legal Aid, and today I speak on behalf of the Consumer and Family Advocates, Legal Aid, AARP, and Elder Voice Family Advocates, and we also want to lend our support and thanks to Senator Housley, not only for bringing this bill forward, but also for her passion, commitment to addressing the issues of elder abuse, and her hard work on this for many sessions. And so we just want to add our voice in support of this important bill.
Thank you.
At this time, members, Mr. Curran, Senator Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator Housley, for bringing this bill forward. I think it's extremely important with everything that we've seen and the challenges that we've had in the elder care. And I like the term, I think the one term that stood out to me in today's testimony was involuntary discharge. I had a very close personal friend who did everything right and leading up to the end of his wife's long-term battle with Alzheimer's, only to be in a facility that, because of her physical mobility but diminished capacities, became a challenge for the nursing home to manage. She was in the right spot, doing the right thing, and absolutely where she should be. But because of her mobility, I think the ombudsman is critical to provide the advocacy, but I think we can't lose sight of the agency's role in setting the behaviors in the rules process and setting the behaviors, which takes the tools away from the facilities to actually do their job in the most humane manner. In this particular case, they conned a very intelligent friend of mine into believing that, well, we can't serve her needs as well in this facility, which was a memory care unit serving Alzheimer's. And so we would like to have you have an evaluation at a hospital in St. Paul. They conned her out. It was ineffective and wasn't going to work. He basically, after spending 8 to 9 hours in the hospital waiting for a geriatric psychiatric evaluation, when there really is only 2 options, medicate or isolate. And so he took her out of that hospital in United, and then on his way home called the very nursing home in which she was at for the previous month. And they said, well, Mr. So-and-so, we've been instructed that if you come back, we will be, you're not allowed in, and we will call the police or they'll call the local sheriff. That appears to be happening all over the state. The ombudsman is a great tool to help families through that, but it's in a critical point when they're emotional and they've done everything they can. They're physically exhausted, mentally exhausted in this battle. We have to continue to put pressure on the agencies themselves. We have to stop these crazy rules from allowing them and exposing. It's about risk, right? If they isolate a patient, is the most humane thing to isolate a patient for overnights when they're most active and they can't control somebody. Is the best solution to kick them out of the facility that's designed for them, move them 60, 80 miles away from home? You know, it's not. So I fully support the Ombudsman Office. I hope that I hope the funding comes from a portion of the DHS budget, because these offices, the critical need for these exist because of the failure of DHS and Department of Health to accurately do their jobs. And so as much as I support the office, and I do believe in the Ombudsman because of the complexities that we have created. Remember, we've created this process. We have to stop making it difficult for the people who care for the most vulnerable to do their jobs. And I hope at some point, this is a positive statement, that the Ombudsman's office does have to shrink and go back because we're actually serving the needs without creating an expert advocate because of our agency's failure to do their job. So thank you, Senator Housley. You know I'm a big fan, and I support this, and I support everybody who works in that office. So thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, thank you, and Senator Curran, thank you for that. That is the issue. That's one of the issues that we have been working on in the interim, like the testifiers said, in the fall and the winter for the last couple of years, and we're doing our best to continue to work on that and get consensus with all parties, and hopefully that's what will come out of this committee and this session in Senate File 8.
Mr. Chair, quick follow-up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Curran.
And Senator Housley, and so I'm a broken record. I'm not going to stop until we get it. So I want Department of Health, and I want Department of Human Services to commit to a pilot. Let's get them in the facilities doing the care. If we never attach the decision makers to that decision, we will never change their decision-making abilities. And so when they have to live and walk a mile in their shoes, I think the process will change. So without that, it's only going to be talk and rhetoric about we're going to try harder and we're going to do better. We need to see action. So, and I know you're committed to it as well as am I. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Curran.
Senator Eakin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Housley, for bringing this bill forward. This is an important bill, and I'm glad to see this bill, which finally recognizes the importance of the Ombudsman's Office and the importance of having an independent advocate for seniors and their families. I was speaking with Cheryl Hennon earlier this year, actually in the fall, when our nursing home closed in Twin Valley, and 30 residents needed to be relocated to different nursing homes, and how important their role is in helping families with those transitions, especially those who are suffering from dementia and so on, who obviously the disruption of that type of a transition is a very challenging thing, and they can't process what's happening. It's very stressful for the residents and for their family members. So this is a very badly needed bill, and I'm glad to see it coming forward, and I'm glad to see all the strong support that it's receiving today. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members for hearing this bill. It is extremely important, and we have been working with the Ombudsman, Cheryl Hannon, Senator Eakin, and myself over the last few years, and to see all the great work that they do, but how spread thin that they are, and how many more instances or stories that they're needed to step in and help, but there's not the resources available. So we're asking for 31 new ombudsman, 25 new ombudsmen and 6 employees, which would really, really help diffuse a lot of this stuff that we've been talking about in the news over the last couple of years. So with that, I would like to, I guess you have to ask for the vote, don't you? It goes to Human Services Reform.
Senator Housley moves that Senate File 931 be recommended to pass and referred to Human Services Reform, Finance, and Policy. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next bill on the agenda is Senate File 8. Senator Housley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's the big one there on in your packet. I have the A3 amendment before you, and this is our first stop. Yeah, so I'd like to move the A3 amendment.
Senator Housley moves the A3 amendment. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? The amendment is adopted. Senator Housley.
Members, the A3 delete all amendment before you today represents the collaborative spirit of Minnesota. As you know, the Department of Health, the Long-Term Care Imperative, AARP, Elder Justice, and other advocacy groups came together over the summer and fall to work out their differences and to come forward with consensus items to bring to the legislature related to elder care. This was a big lift for everyone. In fact, we're still working on these items together. Minnesotans want to see a comprehensive bill pass this legislative session that protects our senior citizens. I promise to continue to work with all involved during this process. In order for us to start drafting the bill for a committee, we had to start somewhere. At this time, the most recent version was the language that came from the Minnesota Department of Health dated March 15th, and we used that language as our base. There have been 2 other versions released since that time. As a result, we have language that does not reflect the most recent agreements or discussions. What we have introduced is incomplete and unfinished, but represents a hybrid of the stakeholders' language, including some provisions from MDH, Long-Term Care Imperative, House File 90, which was the Advocates Bill, and from last year's omnibus bill that was vetoed by Governor Dayton. It's my intent to pass this bill out of Family Care and Aging Committee today to Health and Human Services, Finance and Policy. We'll then clone the engrossed version of the bill and send 1 clone to Judiciary and 1 to State Government. Then all parts will be reassembled in Finance Committee. I'm hopeful in the meantime the work will continue to come to a consensus and the legislature will be able to support and pass quickly. Now we'll go through all of the articles of the bill, starting with Article 1, Assisted Living Licensure. Section 1 contains definitions, what are basic care services and comprehensive assisted living services. Section 2, this section requires an assisted living facility to be licensed. It also creates 3 licensure tiers. Tier 1 is a basic care facility that provides basic care services. Tier 2 is an assisted living facility that provides basic care services and comprehensive assisted living services. And Tier 3 is an assisted living facility that provides basic and comprehensive assisted living services and provides services in a secure dementia care unit or wing. Section 3 authorizes the Commissioner of Health as the regulatory authority. Additionally, the Commissioner is giving rulemaking authority for the new basic care and assisted living facilities. Section 4 creates the application for licensure. The application fees are blank at this time. Section 5 through 11 address background studies, consideration of applications, provisional licenses, and other administration issues. Article 2 is surveys and enforcement. This addresses surveys and enforcement by the Commissioner, including suspending licenses, appeals rights, and plans of transfer of residence due to license suspension. It also addresses correction orders using level of scope of violation and the use of fines. Article 3, facility responsibilities. It establishes minimum facility requirements for licensed facilities. This is a long list of items including distributing to residents, family and resident representatives, the basic care and assisted living bill of rights. Other responsibilities include a requirement that facilities must have written policy and system for receiving, investigating, reporting, and attempting to resolve complaints from its residents and designated representatives. The facility must also comply with reporting requirements of maltreatment and have an abuse prevention plan. Article 4 deals with contracts, terminations, and relocation. There's still a lot of work to be done in the termination provisions. This bill does allow for the facility to terminate within a 30-day notice unless it's an emergency or non-payment, and then it's 10 days. The resident is allowed to appeal the termination of housing services to the Office of Administrative Hearings. If the facility is allowed to relocate the resident within the facility, it must provide at least 30 days' notice to the resident. Article 5, staffing requirements. This portion of the bill requires specific training for basic care staff and supervisors. It also specifies orientation and annual training requirements. This article also requires assisted living facility dementia training requirements. Article 6. This article states a basic care facility shall complete an individualized initial review of a resident's needs and preferences. It also states an assisted living facility shall conduct a nursing assessment by an RN within 5 days of start of services. The article also addresses medication management and administration for assisted living facilities. Article 7, residents' rights and protections. This article addresses the residents receiving the information of their rights as a resident of the facility, including the Bill of Rights and the facility's complaint system. Section 3, page 87, specifically states retaliation is prohibited and defines actions that may be considered retaliatory. Section 4 prohibits deceptive marketing practices and creates a gross misdemeanor if a facility misrepresents itself as a licensed facility without the appropriate license. Section 5 prohibits discrimination based on source of payment. Section 6 prohibits use of physical or chemical restraints for the purpose of discipline or convenience. Section 7 establishes a basic care facility and assisted living bill of rights. Now on to Article 8, physical plant requirements. This requires specific building safety requirements for basic care facilities and assisted living facilities by August 1st, 2021. And the Commissioner may grant variances for the facility. Article 9, Tier 3, assisted living licensure. This article provides for additional requirements for Tier 3 licensure. This includes additional training for staff and services for dementia care. Article 10, Board of Executives for Long-Term Services and Supports. Changes the Board of Examiners of Nursing Home Administrators to Board of Executives for Long-Term Services and Support. Article 11, Assisted Living Licensure Conforming Changes. Establishes bed fees for new licenses, increases fines for Level 2, Level 3, and Level 4 violations. Adds a resident of basic care facility or assisted living facility to definition of vulnerable adult. Article 12, electronic monitoring. This is the same bill that passed to the floor that we heard here early in session. It still includes the 14-day window to install an electronic monitoring device without notice to the facility. Article 13, the Office of Health Facility Complaints. This language is in part from the omnibus bill from last year that requires the commissioner to continue to work to improve the Office of Health Facility Complaints and report back to the legislature. It also includes language to allow the OHFC to share information regarding maltreatment reports to the reporter. Article 14, this includes language from Senate File 1686, which expands the Home and Community-Based Services Employee Scholarship Program to include loan forgiveness. This language came from the long-term care imperative to allow payments for student loans for employees. This also includes language from Senate File 1296 to allow a victim to receive a speedy trial if the court determines that the age and the health of the victim justifies doing so. Article 15, we're almost there. Ombudsman for long-term care appropriation. This provision fully funds the request for 31 new staff at the Office of Ombudsman for long-term care. That was Senate File 931 that we just heard. This covers the substance of the A3 delete all amendment before you today. This bill is still a work in progress. This language from MDH is a good place for us to start. Through the next few days, we will continue to work with stakeholders to get this bill in the shape we want it to be for its next committee stop, HHS Finance. Thank you to everyone who has worked so hard on this language and who will continue to work on this issue for the next few months. We will pass a comprehensive elder care reforms bill this session to protect our most vulnerable citizens. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have some testifiers I'd like to call up here.
Thank you. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we have Kent Edwards first. If Kent is here. Oh, maybe Kent's not here. Oh, Kent's here. Kent's here. Kent will tell you about his lovely mother.
Thank you, Senator Howell.
Good morning. Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself.
Hey, my name is Kent Edwards. It was about 2 years ago that I moved my mother into a facility. Actually, she was in United Hospital, and the county placed her into a facility up north. 4 days later, I got a phone call of some abuse that had occurred. I was given no details. I was told that the police were notified. I decided to do my own investigating. On my way up there, I stopped at the police station. There were no reports of any calls or anything. It drew some concern. So when I went into the facility, I sat down with the director, had my phone on record, and I got a half hour of smoke and mirrors of my mother was called a name. Apparently, there was a third aide that took video of my mother being harassed, taunted, assaulted, and the facility was given this information. Yet they did not share any of this with me, and they told me they had reported it to the ombudsman. They gave me a reference number. As the power of attorney and the healthcare director, I tried to get the details, get the information. I was unable to. Later on down the road, about 3-4 months later, I did get the videos. I also got the prosecutor's report. I made a report to the ombudsman, and I referenced the initial report that the facility did. Normally, it takes 7 to 12 months for an investigation to be completed. Within 3 weeks, they were found guilty of maltreatment, not reporting on time, multiple violations. Essentially, my mother was retaliated against. She was chemically restrained. Her health deteriorated rather quickly. And then I was given a spiel to have her put on home hospice health care, but take the word hospice out of it. It's just an extra way to get an extra set of eyes and ears on her through Medicaid. I was not told that two separate doctors actually needed to physically examine her and say that she was on hospice to be on this program. So, at any rate, I agreed to it. She was placed on there. She got worse and worse. She went from walking and talking, just being forgetful, to being in the vegetative state. I asked the county to find a new home for her. They said that was my job. I found it very difficult, so a week later I called and said, I'm going to hold you accountable if you don't aid me in finding her a new home. 4 days later, we had her moved. My difficulties and desires would be to have cameras in all of these facilities, not just in rooms, but we need to figure out a way to get past HIPAA compliance to be able to monitor the facility. Couple things. My mother was given an over amount of chemical restraints. Well, where are the numbers or where's the regulation on those medicines? Not only that, when the resident passes away, what does the facility do with those meds? Are they reusing them? There's many different questions. I have a lot of different notes here. Eventually, my mother passed. We had a suit, and of course, with her passing, their survivor's bill. We did not have that, so any punishment towards the facility died with her. So, with Senator Housley and all the work she's done, I've been listening to all the different articles that are being presented, and it's fantastic, but we need to get transparency, both between whoever the family is and the appointed health director to be able to get information from the ombudsman, and then also these medical companies that work within the facilities that prescribe meds, treatments, that needs to be visible as well. Just trying to think what else I got.
Mr. Edwards, if we could move this along, we do have some other people that need to
Yep.
testify. You have a very compelling story, and I'm glad you're able to share it with us, but could you wrap it up?
Absolutely. I
Thank you.
will just say this. I have been a big advocate and an open book for other people that have needed help. And I'll give you one last instance. A year ago, I had a young lady, her father was in rough shape. She was unable to go into the facility because they were tired of her complaining of, bruises, whatnot. I walked straight in, walked right up to his room, talked to him, took pictures, went and asked the nurse for a medical report. She started printing it out, then said she might need to check for, authority. So if I can walk into a facility and into a resident's room without being questioned, we need some reform. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Edwards, if you don't mind. Just briefly, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your testimony. Thanks for your contribution to the bill. Am I reading you correctly? You would like to see a survivorship clause added to this bill?
I would prefer standalones, but if it's added, I would say yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Council, you had some comments?
Mr. Chair, members, and to the audience, I am perfectly aware of all the drafting errors that are in the amendment. There's no need to start texting or emailing me. We are waiting on another amendment that hopefully will be here in time to be offered and moved today. There's also a plan to have a instruction to staff to correct all the cross-references. You don't have to get very far before you see that there isn't a single correct cross-reference in the entire document. So we're aware of it. We're taking care of it. It'll be corrected, hopefully all before the first engrossment comes out.
Thank you. At this time, I believe we have,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple extra, or some more testifiers. I've got Sean Burke again, the Policy Director from Minnesota Elder Justice, and Beth McMullen from the Alzheimer's Association.
Mr. Burke.
Mr. Chair, members, thanks. Again, my name is Sean Burke with the Minnesota Elder Justice Center. And again, many thanks to Senator Housley for her leadership. Our office helped facilitate conversations around electronic monitoring this fall and a bill that you heard earlier this session. And so you know, Senator Housley, how the details are important and how difficult they are to work them out. We are also very appreciative of the work and the efforts of the large number of stakeholders that it has taken to get to this point, and especially the Senate staff and the work that they have done as well. Conversations on these issues have come a long way since our organization worked with other consumer groups last year on a comprehensive set of consumer protections. These conversations are still ongoing, and we are grateful for Senator Housley and the departments, especially MDH under Commissioner Malcolm and her team, for pulling together stakeholders and initiating and having these conversations. There is a lot of progress in this bill and critical licensing structures that will greatly change the way residents are currently protected, are contemplated, and laid out. I do want to point out a few things that we will be especially focused on as conversations continue. First, as has been mentioned earlier, involuntary discharge. Discharges from any facility, including assisted living, can be traumatic, especially for people with dementia, and especially when they are unnecessary. We strongly support a robust set of protections, and we urge this bill to go further than it currently does. This bill does provide for appeal rights, but they're simply too narrow and too limited. This version contemplates that in an assisted living, they can terminate someone for nearly any reason as long as it's not retaliatory. We think there's a better option, and that is to ensure that residents can only be terminated for a few sets of reasons. Now, this doesn't mean that providers can't discharge residents. They should be able to when residents pose a significant safety threat or when they can show that they can no longer meet their needs. But take Senator Cran's example. What happens when a person and their family think they can be met in the facility and their needs can be met, but the facility won't budge? What then? They should have the right to appeal. This bill doesn't allow for that, and we urge further consideration of those rights. Senator Cran's story is really an incredible example of the fact that we need strong protections in assisted living, similar to residents who live in group homes and in nursing homes. 3 other quick areas to bring to your attention. We need to be careful that when we define assisted living, starting on line 1.24, let's make sure that we capture all the types of places that we truly want to regulate and regulate them in the manner that's appropriate. In this version, for example, you will see an extensive list of settings that are actually exempt from AL licensing. And while many are appropriate, we just need to be careful and ensure that we're not creating any loopholes. We believe that there is a strong commitment from stakeholders to work on this technical but important issue. Second, staffing plans. Sometimes people talk about this as staffing ratios. Perhaps no one measure in a licensing bill does more to ensure safety and quality than ensuring that there's an appropriate level of staff who is trained to meet the needs of the people that they're caring for. While mandated specific ratios might not be the best method, facilities should be required to show a detailed plan about how they are staffing the facility so that regulators can ensure the proper care is taking place. And finally, enforcement of the Bill of Rights. Consistent with our previous message and work with other consumer groups, residents need the option to be able to privately enforce some of their most critical rights. This bill doesn't allow that, but without the private enforcement, we're simply concerned that we have some good ideas and protections on paper that are not enforceable enough. Still, the bill, like I said, comes a long way. Many thanks to Senator Housley, all the staff, the department, and all the stakeholders, and we look forward to the many conversations in the months to come. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, my name is Beth McMullen with the Alzheimer's Association. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today in support of Senate File 8, the Delete All Amendment, with more work to come. I want to thank Senator Housley for her steadfast commitment to improving safety and quality of care in long-term care facilities. The Alzheimer's Association is the world's leading voluntary health organization in Alzheimer's care, support, and research. We work to advance public policies at the state and federal level to improve the lives of all those affected by Alzheimer's, including those living with the disease as well as their caregivers. Among our state policy priorities are a couple of areas central to the discussion today: building a dementia-capable workforce, enhancing the quality of care in residential settings, and protecting people living with dementia from abuse, neglect, and maltreatment. Attention to these priorities is reflected in the bill before you today. It requires dementia training for those who work in these settings, and it provides some protections for people with dementia from being improperly displaced from residential settings. Last fall, Commissioner Malcolm pulled together the multiple work groups, and we've testified before this committee on that work. I served at her request as the convener of the Dementia Care Standards Work Group. And I just want to remind the committee of the 3 general high-level recommendations that we had to guide our work on dementia care. 1, people living with Alzheimer's disease or other dementias are not required to live in any particular type of setting. 2, there should be additional license or certification requirements, minimum standards, for dementia care settings, so for those who say we provide specialized care for people with dementia. And 3, that since people living with dementia will live in all types of long-term care settings, that all settings should meet some level of minimum dementia training requirements. These high-level dementia standard recommendations are generally reflected in the bill before you today, and we will continue to work with the author and the other stakeholders to hone those and make them the best possible that we can bring forward to the legislature. Also in this bill are provisions on electronic monitoring. While placement of a monitoring device alone does not ensure safe, quality care, and it shouldn't replace other means of prevention or detection of abuse, it certainly can be a useful tool. Finally, for people living with dementia, changes in routine living care arrangements can be very disruptive, leading to declining health. There are a number of issues in this bill that are critical components for consumer protections that'll help minimize disruptions in living and care arrangements whenever possible. There are policies related to resident assessments, involuntary discharges, terminations, appeal rights. These are all critical consumer protections for vulnerable adults. I just want to take a minute also to highlight a couple of the recommendations from the Alzheimer's Disease Working Group, which the legislature passed funding for in 2017, and they worked over throughout 2018 to create a set of recommendations, and those recommendations were delivered in a report to the legislature. I want to say it was in January. And there are a couple of their recommendations that relate to the provisions in this bill as well. So I just wanted to highlight those. The Alzheimer's Disease Working Group recommended reviewing, strengthening, and expanding rights of vulnerable adults living in long-term care settings. And the work group also recommended clearly defining dementia standards, so similar to as I've already described. So I look forward to continuing to work with the author and the other stakeholders on this bill, and be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Senator Housley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 more testifiers. I've got Jan Malcolm, the Commissioner of Department of Health, and then Dan Pollock with Department of Human Services.
Welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jan Malcolm, Commissioner of the Department of Health. Thank you, Senator Housley. This is a really encouraging moment. I think I just want to reinforce a couple of the important points Senator Housley made. I think she absolutely characterized this correctly as a work in progress, but that reflects an enormous amount of progress already. The fact that we are here with such an ambitious bill, a comprehensive bill, and as the Senator said, I think that is what Minnesotans expect from us in response to all that we've learned over these last couple of years as a state. There is no single piece of the solution to how we can do a better job of ensuring quality, safety, and dignity for all of our citizens in Minnesota, but particularly for vulnerable Minnesotans who are entrusting their care to facilities of various different types at this particular stage of life. So I think we, as you have heard from the work groups that have testified earlier in the session, the discussions that we've had over the last 6 months or so have been wide-ranging. There are a number of topics in this bill. It is a significant bill and a complicated piece of statute to try to pull all of these threads together. And I, too, want to especially thank committee staff and council. They have given enormous amounts of time to participating in the work groups and now helping us to pull these threads together. So thank you for that. The Senator mentioned that while we have really genuine agreement in principle on the big concepts, there is very important detail work still that we're working out. Differences in preferences in language, and as Mr. Burke just said, the details matter, and the details are where it gets hard. So I appreciate Senator Housley's support for that and awareness that the additional time we will spend at that level of detail will help us all produce a better bill at the end of the day. But I certainly want to reinforce that the governor and lieutenant governor share your commitment, Senator, that we will get this done this year. And there are just so many benefits to Minnesotans from us taking the time to do this right. So I just want to mention, I think that the timeline for building out this system is very important. We appreciate the inclusion in the bill of a transition period for not only for the departments to stand up the regulatory aspects of this, but for the provider community as well to be educated and to have some time to convert to the new standards. The rulemaking timeline in the bill is a little problematic, especially because we know the rules will be complex themselves, and we want to make sure there's room for public engagement and comment. But we certainly will work with the Senator on details like that. And I just want to thank also the stakeholders as we are doing this difficult work about the details. I'm just grateful and proud of the fact that those discussions continue to be respectful and based on kind of a common desire to reach the best outcome possible. So it's really a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair and Senator Housley, thank you so much for a moment to testify. Dan Pollock, Assistant Commissioner at DHS. I want to echo Commissioner Malcolm's remarks and just say it is really refreshing to see so many of the shared ideas that the stakeholders have offered and worked together to come to more of a fruition this year. And I think this is a really great comprehensive starting point. And there are probably just, some differences that really can be reached between the House and the Senate, and obviously the governor and the executive branch. I won't dwell too much on things that people have already touched on. I just want to, on behalf of DHS, make a case for a couple of the pieces of the governor's budget that may be considered in subsequent committees as well. But really of key importance are the improvements to the common entry point, the MARC system that is touched on in the bill. As you've heard from testifiers, and I think from even senators, getting more timely notification to law enforcement agencies, the 340 law enforcement agencies, making sure that they have maltreatment reports and follow-up investigation information, making sure that we're doing the data collection needed to help them for these safety and quality improvements. That is a key piece of the governor's budget. Making sure that local counties and tribes have adult protection funding through a grant proposal in the governor's budget. And then last but not least, I know Senator Housley touched on this, but building that new case management system, having a shared language between DHS, MDH, and the counties is part of the governor's budget to build out this SSIS system. So those are key agency funding requests, and I think equally important, just as much so as the good policy ideas that are in this bill, and we recognize. Just a couple of flags for the discussion on the policy sections. The piece about restraints that we actually heard about in the testimony, we think restraints should just be prohibited altogether. Restraints are a form of maltreatment, and page 90, line 1 should just say restraints may not be used, hard stop. We continue to have conversations with the full stakeholder group about the concept of a basic care facility, which as conceived really lives outside of assisted living as we know it. We are just a little bit concerned about how consumers will view this and whether they will understand that that type of setting might not be eligible for all elderly waiver payments, depending on how it's structured, and housing supports may not be able to afford the rent there. And then lastly, in the latter part of the section that Senator Housley referenced from last year, and I can raise this in judiciary if that's more appropriate, but just the data classification for the common entry point, going from confidential to private does really concern us. We are concerned that the perpetrator, him or herself, might be able to access the data in that circumstance during an open investigation, and I don't think anybody intended for that to be the case. So I can commit today that we'll provide timely fiscal analysis and continued technical analysis. We're pleased to be part of this conversation, and thank you for the opportunity to testify and the commitment that you're showing here today.
Thank you, Mr. Pollack. Senator Housley.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Are you going to stay around?
Sure can.
Okay, good. That would be good because they might have questions. I have Carrie Thurlow with Leading Age and Toby Pearson with Care Providers. And then I have just one more testifier after that, and then we can do questions. Thanks. Toby.
Welcome to the committee.
Mr. Chair, members, my name is Toby Pearson with Care Providers of Minnesota, today with the long-term care imperative, with staff's comments about fixing all of the little Waldos in there. I can shorten up my testimony significantly. First, we'd like to thank Senator Housley for her continued work on this important topic. You've been working on this for a number of years. As we've said previously in testimony, you continue to listen, although sometimes we would prefer if you listened a little more closely, but, you know, we keep working together anyway. This important topic should take important steps to focus on prevention, increase transparency, and move towards more accountability. To the adults who have suffered from maltreatment and their family members and friends, we offer our deepest heartfelt sympathy. You've heard many stories in this committee about horrible, tragic events that have taken place. We're deeply disturbed by the isolated examples, and we're deeply disturbed by how many examples there are in each case. It's important to remember that the vast majority of caregivers work incredibly hard in a career that has a great deal of heart involved. These seniors they are providing care to are family to them, which is why stories like those that you've heard impact them and their careers as well. In short, we must do more to prevent abuse and neglect in our settings. Minnesota has passed the 1 million mark for people over age 65. Our senior population will soon represent more than 25% of our state's population. This presents opportunities for how we, as a state, can realize the potential and the value of our aging population. Their wisdom, experience, and skills are things we should be learning from. To help Minnesota continue to be a great place to live, work, and raise family and grow older, we must do better. But our fast-changing aging population also presents challenges. Not only is our state's population growing older and living longer, with that comes greater complexity in physical and mental health. These challenges don't negate the fact that seniors want choices and options in their care, even if it means they choose to take some risks. More and more seniors want to age in place in their homes, in home-like settings, connected to their families, community, and our workforce shortages are already hindering our ability to meet this consumer preference and need. We are not seeing similar growth in our available workforce as we are in our population's need. This is one of the greatest challenges that face our state, and we cannot continue to ignore it. We need to reinforce the profession as an inviting profession for the next generation of workforce rather than create a culture of fear and negativity. That being said, the framework that Minnesota created more than 20 years ago for senior housing has not evolved to keep pace with what's going on and the expansion. That's why this conversation today and this session, last session, and all the times we've talked about it is so very important. We must be thoughtful about the changes and broad-ranging implications to current business models. We must also think about which types of models consumers are desiring when they're looking for care. All of us have a responsibility for quality care and services that support aging Minnesotans, whether we're lawmakers, regulators, providers, or caregivers, and even family members. When we evaluate the current proposal in front of you, we evaluate it from a couple perspectives. First, keep the senior at the center. When it comes to preventing elder abuse, it's the senior who should be at the center of our discussion and deliberations. We should not assume, contrary to many societal stereotypes, that the people that are aging are no longer capable of making choices or taking risks. As we consider laws and regulations that govern where they may live or the services that will help them age with independence, choice, and dignity, we must keep them at the center. As has previously been mentioned, the issues are complicated. There are a broad variety of implications on choice, availability of settings, availability of workforce, just to name a few. To reinforce the concepts that we do support, assisted living licensure with statutes in one section so that it's easier for consumers to understand the laws that apply. We support requiring a licensed entity with clear delineation of responsibility. We support specific delineated requirements for assessments, disclosures, and terminations of rent and services. We support clear standards and qualifications for dementia care, rules around we also support rules around electronic monitoring. We support minimum qualifications for those operating assisted living. We support creation of a quality and technical improvement panel. All of those things that we support are discussed in this bill, but we cannot support the bill in the current form. Our concerns with this proposal because it will put good providers out of business. It will have an unintended consequence because some of the proposal goes and becomes more restrictive than even nursing homes are currently. Consumers want more home-like settings, and this proposal, in some instances, moves in the opposite direction. So without getting into great detail, we have had great conversations with MDH, the advocates, the senator, the staff that has attended. We continue to pledge our participation in those conversations. We would like to see more of those conversations reflected in hopefully in the next rounds and iterations of this bill. Thank you.
Proceed, Ms. Thurlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Again, for the record, my name is Carrie Thurlow with Leading Age Minnesota, here on behalf of the Long-Term Care Imperative. I want to first start by thanking Senator Housley for her work on this bill, sticking with it. These are not easy issues, and really appreciate this important step forward. I want to echo the sentiments of Commissioner Malcolm and Mr. Burke and other advocates that we've made a lot of progress since last session. The interim talks over the fall and the winter that the department convened, and the at least weekly conversations that we continue to have over these important issues continue, and we continue to make progress. So I want to say, and I want to recognize and appreciate Senator Housley's comments that this is a work in progress, but the details matter. And we remain committed to staying at the table to make sure that the details work for everyone. Having said that, I also want to say that the long-term care imperative supports kind of many of the kind of broad concepts in the bill, as Mr. Pearson has already indicated. The movement towards assisted living licensure, strengthening oversight, reducing confusion for consumers and families, helping to ensure safety and prevention of harm. These are all very important goals that we support. And the tricky thing is that we need to do this while also affirming choice, the ability to age in place, to ensure access to care no matter where we live in Minnesota, ensuring affordability and recognizing that Medicaid only pays for services and not the housing component. So this is not an easy undertaking that we are working on today. So while we recognize it's a work in progress, we know there are things that need to still be further discussed. You know, I would also say that, as Mr. Pearson already outlined, the imperative, again, I think it bears saying that there are many key elements that we have agreed with stakeholders should be included in the bill. And while it may not be in its present form all that we had hoped for, you know, key elements around licensure, dementia standards, deceptive marketing, retaliation, electronic monitoring, we agree these should be passed this year, and we are committed to working with the senator on this. I would say also that it's important to recognize that the components work together. And recognizing, for example, the importance of the conversation around termination process and appeals, also recognize that there is good work in here to improve communications up front, so hopefully we don't have confusion or the need for appeals. For example, having language, while the language may not be perfect, having language to require the provider sitting down with the consumer before a termination is even initiated to see and explore whether there are reasonable alternatives to address care needs, hopefully prevents the needs for an appeal before it even begins. But recognizing that there is an appeal process in this bill, and I appreciate that. Recognizing that there is a quality improvement and technical improvement panel to move prevention efforts upstream is critically important to hopefully avoid many of the tragic cases that we have heard about that should be avoided as much as possible. So again, recognizing that all of these pieces work together are very important. We will continue to look to make sure that the senior is at the center of these conversations, that choice is respected and is a centerpiece here, and that there continues to be access to safe, affordable care no matter where seniors live in Minnesota. So with that, Mr. Chair, happy to answer any questions, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thurlow. You have one further
I have one
testifier?
more, Mr. Chair. Yes, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chair. I have Jean Peters from Elder Voices.
Welcome to the committee. Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Jean Peters, and I appreciate the opportunity to share testimony on behalf of Elder Voice Family Advocates today. We thank you for giving elder care the serious attention it desperately needs. Elder Voice has been an active participant of the summer and fall stakeholder work groups convened by Commissioner Malcolm. We've made progress and all agree that licensure of assisted living facilities is necessary. While this bill has many strong provisions, we urge the continued strengthening of this bill in several areas. As a nurse, I will tell you, people are suffering and dying because not only is there an absence of significant regulatory oversight in Minnesota, but also because of the rights of the residents under Minnesota law are being ignored, and there is no effective individual enforcement. It's urgent that we get meaningful legislation. We are pleased that the bill's framework includes pre-assessments. A full and proper assessment by a registered nurse prior to move-in is vital for a safe standard of care. That is what most individuals and their families believe they are signing up for when they are told that entering this assisted living facility will help keep them safe as they age in place in their new home. Currently, we have minimal standards that safeguard residents, More often than not, assisted living and memory care establishments quickly negotiate living arrangements without a proper and full assessment of health care needs or without consideration or disclosure of their capability to meet those needs until after a contract is signed. As time goes on and aging in place occurs, families are stunned to learn that the $6,000, $7,000, $10,000 a month for the memory care facility they just moved into is unstaffed at night, and that our legislation permits it. In order to prevent neglect and maltreatment, we must make certain to guarantee that all aides, assistants, and other members of a care team are adequately trained and competent in providing safe care before assuming the responsibilities of caring for individuals who are at risk and vulnerable. The current standard of completing an 8-hour online training within 160 hours of hire is unacceptable. More alarming yet is that the untrained individual need only have one other person who has passed this course somewhere in the building, while alone they learn on the job. The size of the building does not matter. Recently, we learned of the physical assault to the head of a vulnerable adult by a caregiver while another caregiver held the client down and a third caregiver watched. There's other cases that we don't learn about through the news, like the individual who received a foot soak where the water was so hot it caused blistering and the skin of his or her feet had sloughed off. This individual spent 51 days in the hospital. It is our desire to continue working with stakeholders to improve staff training and staffing levels, which are key to preventing maltreatment and to the delivery of safe, quality care. Families and vulnerable adults look forward to our lawmakers to developing a regulatory framework and strong consumer protections that keep older and vulnerable Minnesotans safe in their assisted living environment. Their lives depend on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have Mary Jo here with AARP.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, in the interest of time, I will try to shorten my remarks. I'm Mary Jo George with AARP, and we appreciate the opportunity to testify. And as others have said, we really appreciate Senator Housley's leadership on this issue and her continued ability to bring the parties together to achieve consensus. We do believe that there are a number of really good things, and this is a very good framework. Obviously, we have to read the bill more in detail in terms of the specifics. But generally, we have consensus with the industry on the public oversight and the different levels of tiers based on needs. That's a very positive direction. We also have consensus on the need for one accountable entity to provide and deliver that care. Today, the care is provided by two separate entities that can result in harm when there isn't accountability for the resident in developing that care plan. So we think this bill addresses that quite well. The one area that we have concerns around is whether or not the bill is broad enough in reaching these senior housing facilities that provide wellness and daily monitoring checkups on individuals. Many families place their older loved ones in these facilities, but today we have a regulatory gap. We do not define that health monitoring or wellness check, and so we've heard some horrific stories about, families finding their loved ones deceased in their apartments alone for days. So we want to make sure that we do cover that. I think you've heard a little bit and a lot about some of the involuntary discharge rights. I want to just say that generally we do have a different approach than the industry, and we have to keep working on it. I think under this bill, it would really allow them to terminate an older vulnerable adult for any reason. We think we should have permissible reasons as to what those discharge rights are. We also think that everyone should have due process and be able to appeal these rights. Under this bill, they're limited. And then finally, I think really the crux of the matter is the definitions of how we're defining emergency. Again, under this bill, it's probably, we need to kind of separate what we mean by an emergency from a change of healthcare condition. So we need to work on some of that definition language. I think there has been movement, though, and we appreciate it, Senator Housley, that you've added language that says facilities have to transfer you to a safe location. That's really important. And that you have to have a place to go. That addresses some of the concerns that we've had, people being discharged to homeless shelters. Last but not least, we continue to advocate for strengthening rights against retaliation and deceptive marketing. Again, there's movement in that there's a list of actions that are considered retaliatory, so there is a presumed action. However, it is lacking the enforcement. We think if we're going to get a change in the culture at these settings, we need some tools and some deterrence from these private right of action that members, older vulnerable adults have had. And I just want to say, you know, there's 17 states today that do have these rights. And so we'll continue to try to work together to have compromise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Housley, I believe at this time we do have the amendment that we spoke of. And before we get to questions, I think we should take that up and get that taken care of. So I think we will need a motion to reconsider the adoption of the amendment A3, because then we will amend that amendment with this A4 amendment. So Senator Abler moves to reconsider the adoption of the A3 amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. So at this time, I think we'll have council explain. Well, let's adopt the amendment first, and then we'll have council explain it. Is that the way you want to proceed, Senator Housley?
Yeah, I would like to move the A4 amendment.
All right. Senator Housley moves the A4 amendment, which will be amending the A3 delete all amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Council, if you would explain what we're doing here. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, so the A4 represents primarily mistakes that occurred in trying to create the A3. A number of things were stuck in the wrong spot or omitted or repeated. So much of what's happening here is trying to put everything in its right spot. In addition, the support staff, when they saw cross-references on the same page they were already working on, they included changes to the cross-references. This by no means even comes close to correcting all the cross-references. So that will happen when there'll be an instruction when the final bill is moved. The big things that we're missing entirely from the A3 are the task force on page 6, which a number of testifiers have mentioned, and it wasn't in the bill, but it was meant to be. And the background studies for staff was completely omitted, and so that is back in with this amendment. And some language about emergency closures had inadvertently gotten dropped.
Thank you. At this time, I will take questions. First of all, I have Senator Abler. Oh, well, I believe we voted on it already.
Okay. Okay, thanks. We have to re-adopt.
I'm
so
sorry.
we finished all the voting first? We voted on the amendment, didn't we?
Yes. We just voted on the amendment. We haven't voted on the main bill. So do you want to, we have
Let's
to
just
adopt
get
the
that
A4 then? I'm sorry. At this time, Senator Abler moves to adopt the A3 amendment. I'm sorry.
As amended.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now I'll take my comment if I can. And I'm sorry the hour is so late. I first want to commend the chair and this entire room full of people who are trying to do a very good thing. And this is not an easy topic, and I think we're getting close. But sometimes you want to go on vacation, and you think you're going to land on, at 100 feet of elevation. Sometimes you may have to land in Denver just to get the plane down. And I want to encourage the providers. I'm surprised that they're strong on their not support here. I want to encourage them to keep moving at least to Denver, and the people in the audience who would like to go on a vacation somewhere. Denver is actually a very nice town. To not try to fix everything here, because the risk is that you try to get everything and you wind up with another time of delay, and that makes me very nervous. And so, with all respect to Ms. George and some of the parts that aren't covered, this is really hard. And I'll take my question offline about how much rulemaking the department really needs, because that makes me a little bit nervous. And I just wanted to mention restraints. That's like a historic discussion. So is a belt a restraint? Is a bed rail a restraint? People fall out of bed and actually get harmed. And so I think that I'll be happy to work with you to clarify that section rather than just barring things, but for safety purposes and if part of a plan, but certainly not to restrain someone from being untoward. But Senator Housley, a lot of us have your back on this, and we want this to go forward. And to all the people in the groups with all the different varying concerns, we have to get to a point that we can get a bill to pass, to have some protections in place, and to modernize this industry in a good way. So I'm committed to that, and appreciate all the good faith. Please keep your good faith up, and let's work on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Housley, for sticking with us and working through all the workables. And I echo Senator Abler with getting the folks here to talk. Unfortunately, it doesn't leave us enough time within our own committee to really have a conversation. And I think the next stop we will address. And Senator Abler, so thank you, Senator Housley. Senator Abel, I would hope the aversion and deprivation stuff that you had worked on 20 years ago still needs to be talked about. I can't believe we're here having this conversation. So at the next stop, I won't take up our committee's time. And I know Senator Rude and also would like to, we were talking about just not having time within our own committee to have this discussion. It should be enriched here. The case management system, when you start hearing that, it's just kind of shocks me a little bit. What's it going to look like? How is it going to look like? Are they going to third party it? Where's the consistency in case managers across the board, et cetera? Is that going to be internal? Is that external? I mean, those are things that we should really talk about, and I don't really want to micromanage that, but we know if you don't have consistency in case management, you don't have a coordinated, comprehensive, and collaborative system. And so I just want that to be a little more in-depth conversation on it as well, and I think probably at the next stop. Unfortunately, we just don't have time here, but thank you, everybody, for working on this. It's important work that we're doing, and with that, I guess I'll save my questions, unfortunately, on the next stop, and I'm glad I'm on that next stop. So thank you for your work, Senator Housley.
Senator Rude.
Mr. Chair and Senator Housley, I echo that sentiment. Thank you, Senator Housley. This is really, it's my heart, and I think this is a truly important task. And I appreciate all the testimony that we had today. That's important. But it's important that the committee has the opportunity to work on the bill. And today we are already late and over our time. And so all the questions and the things that this committee would like to work on, we have no time for. So I'm hoping as it goes through the process, while the testimony is very valuable, we need time as a committee to work on this bill, and we have not had that opportunity. So Senator Abler, as it comes to your committee, I would hope that, it goes to Senator Benson? Okay. Well, I would just hope that we would have the opportunity and maybe more committee time to actually work on the bill, because it's so vitally important to get this right, and that we have the opportunity to do that. So I thank you for bringing this forward, but we really need to have some committee time to actually work on the bill. So,
thank you. Senator Eakin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Senator Housley. I also echo some of the same concerns about the timing. And having had the delete it was about 10 o'clock last night, I think, that it was completed. So I think, I certainly don't want to hold things up because it is an important bill to move and to keep moving on this issue. I know we're pressing up against deadlines. But it's also important that we, have time to digest and to be able to discuss and to end up possibly offer amendments that may improve the bill. I have some concerns, but on the whole, this is, it's a major step forward. And so we need to keep moving forward. I have some questions just as far as the process, I guess, moving on from here. I know you said it's going to HHS Finance from here, and then it's going to be broken into two parts. Well, actually, two clones because of the deadlines for time's sake. And one will be going to judiciary. The other is going to the state government finance.
State government, yep.
And then what happens after that? Where do they come together again?
Mr. Chair and Senator Eakin, then it will be all reassembled in finance.
All reassembled in finance. And Senator Mr. Chair and Senator Housley, is it going to be moving as a standalone bill?
Mr. Chair, Senator Eakin, that is my hope.
Okay.
That's what we're working towards.
Okay. Well,
is a
thank
standalone.
Thank you for that, Senator Housley. It's my hope as well, so it doesn't get wrapped up and bogged down and possibly derailed by being tied in with other issues. I think that we can get the common ground necessary to get it passed as a standalone. So again, thank you for your efforts. I know time is pressing here, but I look forward to working with you as the bill moves forward about any concerns. But again, it's a major step forward, and I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the bad here. So we need to do what we can get done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Friends.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, thank you, Senator Housley. I know how much work you put in on it. Thank you to everybody who came to testify today. You made major progress here. All of us want to see success on this. All of us certainly want to see a standalone issue. If I heard one theme of those that felt they wish more was in the bill, it would be in the area of civil remedies and survivorship. And I look forward to that conversation as we go forward. I'm keeping my amendment right where it is. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chair, for getting this moving, and thank everybody for coming. To be continued. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments that I would like to make here as we wrap up. Echoing everything that's said, and I wish that this committee would have had more time to review the matters. I think that one of the things we need to look at is the earlier bill we heard today, the Ombudsman bill, plays right into what we're doing here, because in addition to the Office of Health Facilities complaints, we have the Ombudsman, who has been working very hard, even as we go forward, to try and keep up with the complaints and the issues that don't seem to be getting dealt with. So I think as we look forward that we keep in mind that we have that additional piece to the puzzle, if you wish, or to the landing area that Senator Abler referred to. I too echo that this is a marvelous piece of work from what I saw last year and the year before that we worked on, and that all the stakeholders, Senator Housley and the staff, should be commended on the progress that we've made, and hopefully we'll continue with that. With that, Senator Housley moves SF8 as amended be re-referred to Health and Human Services Finance. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of the stakeholders here behind me and all of the family members, and I especially want to thank all of you on the committee for having my back on this and to continue to push forward on this issue. This is my favorite committee of all of my committees, and taking care of our seniors and preventing elder abuse is not a partisan issue. And I think we have worked hard bipartisanly on this issue and this bill. And if there are any questions, because I know there is a lot in here and it was very, very fast, but I don't want to end up where we ended up last year. And getting bogged down in the details and then getting nothing. And that wasn't fair to family members or to the residents or to any of the stakeholders who have worked so hard. So again, this is my number one priority this session, and I want to thank all of you on the committee and the staff for all of your work, and especially the stakeholders behind me for all of their work. So thank you, Mr. Chair, and we'll be continuing to talk on this issue. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Mr. Chair, can I meant to add to my motion that the staff be allowed to correct references and technical matters. Do we need to re-vote on that, or that was my intention as part of the motion?
I think we can probably just instruct staff to do that, give them the authority to make whatever changes. I was going to make that announcement, so I think that will work. So, staff, you have your authority and marching orders. Continue the fine work. With that, no other business. We are adjourned.